Good. Earned income tax credit. A tax credit that the state provides a tax match to the federal earned income tax credit. There's enormous discussion about raising the minimum wage in the state, and if you've been hanging out in this room at budget hearings, you will hear both concerns and support, but also concerns if we're raising the minimum wage for people who are paid through state contracts, home health care workers, hospital workers, Medicaid funded programs, human service workers. How do we make sure when we raise the minimum wage, because I'm in favor of raising it, that we actually are providing money for these not-for-profits and healthcare providers to actually pay the minimum wage? That's the background. As people's minimum wage raises, they will actually be eligible for less earned income tax credit. Now, that might be ideologically controversial to some people, but I think it's factually correct. So right now, 1.8 million New York tax filers receive a state earned income tax credit, and it totals about $4 billion. I'm asking your help. I do not expect you to have an answer in front of you. If you can do some math for me, because we tried and we don't have the numerical, we don't have the information to do the analysis. If we raise the minimum wage, let's say by the end of next year to $12 an hour, and then it goes up $1 a year, there is going to be some corresponding reduction in these families and singles' eligibility for EITC. That seems to me that that is revenue back to the state that could perhaps be used to pay the minimum wage increase costs on those state contracts to workers. Do you get the connection between those?
I follow you, yes.
So do you think your department can help me do some math to understand, based on the governor's proposed minimum wage increase and what your department knows is the payout at different income levels? And there's two different formulas, one for families with children, one for singles, what the corresponding lowering of EITC payout would be for the state, because I think that in the answer to that question is at least a partial solution to how New York State can make sure that it helps to raise low-income people's working pay, but also not put it in a position where it's telling its human service and health care contractors, you have to do it, but we're your revenue stream and we're not helping. So I would love your help with that.
My team will certainly be happy to engage with yours in terms of any technical assistance that we can provide.
Great, thank you. I think I'm at 0 again. I might need a third round, but I don't want to take up.
Start it now because we can.
Well, do you want to go next?
No, you can go. You can finish up.
Okay, one more category. Everyone also on these panels and in the legislature discusses property tax issues endlessly. The cap, the good, the bad, the ugly, the impact on their school districts and their communities. What we don't seem to talk about is the fact that our system for applying property taxes is apparent, according to several studies, the most complex and unjustifiable in 50 states. We have nearly 1,000 assessing units who do different models of assessments of our property taxes, not just in individual municipalities, but perhaps 3 or 4 or 5 different kinds within municipalities, that the system lacks fairness and transparency, and that New York would do far better if it had a model that at least replicated some of the reforms and simplification that other state property tax systems have gone through. Is there something your department is working on now, or is there something we could perhaps work on together to at least address that, what I call mass confusion out there?
Well, Senator, the way our state has chosen thus far to allocate responsibility for property taxes is to repose that valuation methodology, if you will, at the local level, and thus the various disparate methodologies that are in use. Unless and until there is, a direction to arrogate that to the state, we are not in that space beyond providing the support service that we do through our real property tax services to the various localities as they administer their particular systems.
Can you give me an estimate of how many of the localities actually come to you for technical assistance and advice? Because you're right, we let each locality do it themselves, and I feel, actually, I'm New York City, and it's a little bit of a different story, although,
Yes.
trust me, our property tax system is unexplainable and unjustifiable. I talk to representatives from small towns who say it's killing them to try to figure this stuff out correctly. And the staffing costs for themselves is very high. So how many entities do you provide technical assistance to? And is there some reasonable, almost best practice model that you could offer in the absence of the state changing its laws about how it does this?
I couldn't give you a number. I couldn't quantify the inquiries, and I would not want to. I can say anecdotally, I'm aware that there is a lot of interactive communication between our real property tax services function and the localities. Those, as you know, we're dispersed geographically, various areas of the state, and there tends to be very good historically based working relationships. So I think the locals would tell you they don't have a lot of difficulty accessing the state relative to their concerns, and to the extent we can provide assistance, we do. But in terms of the volume, I would have to get back to you on that. As far as best practices, again, we do have subject matter experts, longstanding within the department. And part of what we do try and do with a particular jurisdiction is to share those best practices that are applicable to their particular circumstances. And if we are aware of, because of the unique position we sit in, something happening over here that would be beneficial, or even information sharing, putting together different localities, we will do that as part of the learning pollination process.
Yes, just including, would you agree with my initial analysis, though, that New York is infamously in trouble on this issue?
Well, I agree that it is infinitely complex and disparate because we have so many different approaches that are used among the localities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The executive budget proposes a variety of new tax credits, credit extensions, temporary tax cuts, and other actions that are expected to result in revenue losses of $596 million in the state fiscal year 2017-2018, growing to a loss of $1.2 billion by 2019 and 20. In addition, at least another $2 billion for previously enacted tax cuts are scheduled to impact the 17-18 future fiscal years. Given the proposed tax cuts and credits, in your estimate, is the state fiscally prepared for the next down cycle, which is about 8 years from now? Is the state tax policy ready to withstand any adverse economic circumstances?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a question that is more fully within the ambit of the division of the budget. However, we work closely with the division of the budget, and you are privy to the forecasts that have been provided. So we have contributed, if you will, to that analysis as a partner with Division of Budget, but I don't feel that I would be the best qualified person to opine on that.
I was hoping you would be. The question is, where's the money coming from? In 2015, the legislation was enacted that authorized the Commissioner of Taxation and Finance to consider and implement measures that would exclude from the property tax cap school district shares of capital expenditures made by BOCES. Similar authorizations was given to adjust the quality change factor used in tax-exempt land. And in addition, according to the state controller, the inflation factor of critical components of tax levy limited calculation is set at 0.12% for some schools and some municipalities for 2016. What measures have been taken to ensure appropriate consideration is given within the tax cap calculation to account for such BOCES-related capital expenditures in development and tax-exempt land?
Well, as I said earlier, Mr. Chairman, we're reviewing the impacts of the potential changes called for, if you will, or provided for under that language that was passed last June by the legislature and signed into law. So we're reviewing the impacts of those potential changes on municipalities, school districts, and of course, most importantly, taxpayers. And I think the complexity of it, the inherent complexity of it is embodied by your question. So we have it under review.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Savino.
Thank you, Senator Young. Is this on? It was. There it is. Thank you, Commissioner Boone, for your testimony. I have one or two questions about the converting this. The budget calls for the conversion of the New York City PIT star credit to a New York State PIT credit. The Division of Budget claims that there won't be an impact to the city's financial bottom line. However, if this is enacted, the state will not be making the usual $87 million payment to the city of New York. So I'm kind of confused as to, first, how are we doing this? How will this affect New York City homeowners? And the timing, due to the timing issue with the payments to the state, how will we assure the city of New York that this won't actually have an effect on them?
Okay. So if I hear you correctly, Senator, you're asking me about the proposal to convert the New York City PIT, personal income tax, star credit to New York State PIT star credit. And the rationale behind this is really is to create administrative efficiencies. So currently, so basically what this would do is give eligible taxpayers a credit against their state personal income tax instead of their New York City personal income tax, and thereby eliminating the need for the state to reimburse New York City government as it currently does. So it is shifting the initial or that payment, upfront payment, or burden, if you will, on New York City directly to the state. That's what it accomplishes. So there is no diminution or detriment to the taxpayer. This is more of an administrative efficiency conversion as between the city and the state.
Okay. Also, on I'm sure someone asked this question earlier, but if I didn't hear the answer, I'm sorry for the repetition. But in the conversion of the star exemption benefit, there's a question that I have about what happens to people who aren't required to file returns anymore. You know, they're no longer filing tax returns. How would they get a refund, or how would their credit be carried forward if they don't have to file tax returns?
You're referring now to the transition of converting star to a personal income tax credit.
Right, yes.
Right. And as I said earlier, that is a very gradual transition that impacts only those residential property owners who transfer, actually the purchaser, if you will, of property. So the new purchaser of a property for the first time, or trading up, in those circumstances, that's when this would convert from a star benefit directly to personal income tax credit. So your question on the latter part of that, there is a mechanism, as I recall. I'll get back to you on it to make sure I'm precise, but I believe there is a mechanism that allows, in that instance, for the taxpayer to deal with the local entity. But let me get back to you on that to make sure I'm accurate and precise.
Okay, thank you. And one other thing, for enhanced STAR exemptions, seniors now will have to enroll in an income verification program. Currently, it's voluntary, and it allows the department to annually verify seniors' income eligibility. So, as you know, seniors sometimes don't pay attention to these things. So what steps can we take to make sure seniors who are eligible for the enhanced STAR exemption won't lose it because they didn't file the paperwork or they weren't aware that they had to do it? Do you have a list of those seniors that are eligible for it, and what steps will the department take to make sure that they're aware of this?
Well, we would engage in a very robust communication campaign. We also have a provision that's being proposed to provide the commissioner of tax the discretion in certain circumscribed instances to address, if you will, a failure on the part of a enhanced STAR beneficiary to file. So there are safeguards in terms of how we would approach administering the program, and then we're asking for additional discretion or limited discretionary authority to actually provide a safety net for circumstances where there is a failure with a senior taxpayer, so that they don't lose that significant benefit.
And one final, I guess more of a point than a question, I'll be very brief. I noticed that in the executive budget it calls for a reduction of 92 full-time equivalents at the Department of Tax and Finance. You and I have had this discussion many times when you were the head of civil service. I have a serious concern about what I call, a lack of succession planning in these agencies. We are one retirement away from losing thousands of employees who have a tremendous amount of knowledge, and we're not hiring and backfilling. So I know, your budget calls for no increased hiring, but I think at some point it would be helpful, since you're implementing all sorts of new tax rules, that maybe we start talking about hiring employees again to help implement these new rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. May I offer a comment? As you know, we often do. So talent pipeline is, as you know, is an area that I was very concerned about as Commissioner of Civil Service, and remain very concerned about as a Commissioner of the Workforce in New York State. And I don't totally agree with your premise that we're not engaged in succession planning. So I'm speaking now solely for the tax department, because that's the only authority I have. So at the tax department, we do have a very thoughtful succession planning, knowledge transfer program. And in fact, it's an area, though, that we need to bring more capability to bear. And it's an area where I have augmented our capability so that we are more strategically and systematically looking at talent and performing talent reviews. And we have effective cross-rotational programs now where we're able to move consistent with union rules and civil service rules, move individuals who are performing certain functions from one area to another. So for example, in the audit space, we embed auditors into our criminal prosecution or investigation unit, and that makes us more effective, and the learnings that happen there further inform our audit practices when those auditors go back into the audit arena. So we have rotational assignment programs. Again, it's something that's just one example, but it's something that I am very concerned with: workforce viability, capability, longevity, and making sure that we perpetuate those and transfer those capabilities. And again, at the tax department, we are approaching it in a very systematic way. And and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Commissioner. Did have some follow-up questions. So the governor has announced that he's raising the minimum wage of state workers to $15 an hour. I was hoping that you could give us a report, some information on how many permanent and contractual employees of tax and finance this move would affect.
I thought you might be interested in that.
Good, so you came with the answer. Great.
Yes, I can give you an answer. So most of our employees are at or above the $15 an hour threshold. We have, if memory serves me correctly, some 800 employees who are slightly below, who are in the $14 plus range. And so a relatively small but significant number of our overall employee population of some 4,200 plus permanent full-time, and then we have temporary employees, as you know, to address seasonality in the tax returns. And typically that forms the lion's share of the employee population who are slightly below the $15 minimum. So we're very close, and the impact, while any impact is meaningful, it's not a huge disparity for us.
So just a ballpark figure of number of employees?
I would $700,000, $800,000, somewhere in that range. It's what it would cost.
Still a significant amount of money, right? So 700,000 to 800,000. Interesting.
That's on a budget of $35 million.
Still, $700,000, $800,000 is a significant amount of money.
Of course.
So the department, as Senator Savino pointed out, is expecting to lose 92 FTEs. And you answered some of her questions, but we were just wondering, what programs exactly are the attritions coming from? Can you give us kind of a rundown of where these cuts will be made?
Yes, let me emphasize here, because it's a very important point. The attrition here is through retirement and people who voluntarily leave the department. Okay, there are no layoffs here. So basically, in this proposed budget, our fill level is being reduced by 92. An agency, especially a large agency, is seldom at its maximal fill level. So all this is saying is that we cannot exceed the number of employees that we are approved for minus 92. And that is accomplished through, again, through voluntary departures, people moving on to other opportunities or for whatever reason, or to retirement. And in terms of those positions that we focus on refilling, to the extent that that may be slightly diminished by the 92 FTE reduction in the fill level, we will certainly focus on the direct revenue generation areas to make sure that those are adequately staffed so that we fulfill our mission of collecting revenues and efficiently.
So I appreciate your answer, Commissioner. I guess, and I understood before I asked the question that it would be through retirements and that sort of thing.
Right.
The question was, however, where are the 92 FTEs coming from? What specific jobs, departments within your department are the FTEs coming from?
That will be determined over time as we again, remember, we have a delta of unfilled jobs, and any agency will, large agency, as we manage to our fill level, we're always seeking to have those jobs filled, but just by virtue of the churn of turnover, even though turnover is relatively low, we will have that delta plus other people who attrit, and it depends on where they attrit from. So, for example, if someone leaves outreach, we'd have to weigh that with someone, a need to fill an item in audit. So we'll have to look at it. It's fluid. We'll have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. The best I can tell you is that, again, our first focus will be on revenue collection, that making sure that we're adequately staffed to fulfill that core mission to bring in the revenues that provide the basis for our budget. At the same time, let me say this, since workforce is a passion of mine, I understand the importance of investing long-term in certain capabilities and how that lack of foresight can diminish organizational capability, if not today, down the road. And I am a very fortunate beneficiary of prior leadership and administration that exercise, I believe, great foresight in how we invest how they invest resources in technology and in talent. And that's something that I plan to continue to be very careful at looking at, how do we judiciously make those investments. But that having been said, to the extent that we have to manage to a 92 FTE reduction in field level, we will do that.
So thank you for that response. So basically, I think what you're saying is there's no set plan in place, that just as you go along, you're going to be looking to achieve that 92 FTE mark as you just go forward. And so the legislature won't know during the budget process where you plan to reduce. And I just bring it up because, and by the way, your department's been very responsive. We get constituent cases all the time, as you know, regarding taxation and finance issues. And I think that, as someone who represents the people in my district, we want to make sure that if they have a question, because again, taxes, as you know, are very important to people's lives, and in a positive way or a negative way. Usually they call when there's a negative impact. And I just want to make sure that their questions and their needs are addressed by the department going forward.
Yes, what I try to provide, Senator, is just the guiding principles that we will operate under. And again, at the risk of intruding on my welcome, what I'm trying to say is that in terms of a guiding principle will be that first and foremost, we must protect revenue collection, generation. So in terms of how we make decisions about fields, that is a guiding strategic, direction that we will abide by. In terms of a literal plan, no, I would not hamstring us with, I could not tell you today, area by area, that, there will be a net 2 reduction here and a net 5 reduction over here, except in that strategic framework. So I'm just trying to give you insight into how I'll think about it, how we will think about it.
Thank you. Assemblyman Oaks actually touched on this, but under the executive proposal, the personal income tax exemption for small businesses will be increased from 5% to 15% for small businesses with net business income of less than $250,000 and at least 1 employee. It's our understanding that this proposal would affect about 1.1 million filers. How many additional filers would benefit if there was no requirement on the number of employees?
Senator, I would have to get back to you on that.
I figured you may say that. Yes. I anticipated that, but if you could get that information to me in the Senate, that would be very helpful.
Certainly.
Someone also asked about the tax preparers making permanent and updating certain tax modernization provisions. I haven't had enough coffee, obviously. But how many preparers do you think this will affect?
Well, there are some 43,000 preparers that are in the regulatory body that would be subject to, our oversight rules, if you will. Now, how that translates into specific instances, I couldn't tell you.